Good afternoon and welcome to Accessibility It Matters, the Basics. I just want to say thank you to everyone who is joining us today and to HiEd Web for allowing me to do this presentation. Today we are going to talk about the very basics of accessibility and the things that are critical for us to ensure that we are championing the cause for accessibility everywhere we find ourselves, but especially in our higher education institutions. So, what does accessibility mean? At its very foundation, accessibility means the ability to access. This means everyone has the right to have access to the same information, the right to access the same buildings, the right to access medicine, the right to access anything that one may need. Accessibility benefits everyone, not just those with disabilities. And when we dedicate our time and energy into accessibility, we are showing that we are committed to the basic ideals of equal opportunity and fairness for every person who encounters our content and our spaces. Even though we are required by many laws to enforce accessibility as higher education institutions, we have the duty to make all of our content accessible to students, faculty, staff, and the communities in which our institutions are in. So with all of this, how do our institutions view people with disabilities? There are a few models that we are going to touch on briefly so that we can see what may be influencing our own opinions and our institution's view on accessibility. The first model is the medical model. This model says that disability is the problem, and we should fix the problem in order to help the person. This is what most disability offices are based on and what our federal government disability benefits are based on. The second is the social model. This model says that the problem is actually the environment in which we live, and in order to fix the problem, we need to make our environments more inclusive. This is where our ADA laws come into play by making our buildings more inclusive. The third model is the functional solutions model. This model identifies the functional impairments or limitations of each disability and says that the solutions for eradicating those limitations is actually applying innovation to overcome those limitations of disabilities. Some classify our assistive technology into this model. The fourth model is the social identity and cultural affiliation model. This model says that the personal identity and culture is actually found within the disability. This is best seen in the deaf culture. The fifth model is the charity or tragedy model. This model says that an unfortunate or tragic condition is worthy of special treatment or is used to make others feel better because of the hard life someone else has had. And this model is actually offensive to many people with disabilities. Our institutions fall in a mix of all the models of disabilities, but it is important to understand what model or models we are in so that we can use those models as a way to champion accessibility at our universities. You might be thinking, are disabilities that impact the digital world really that common? The answer is yes. Roughly 1 in 5 people have a disability of some kind. That is 20% of the population, or approximately 1.5 billion people in the world. Depending on the stats you look at, they will vary due to how every country defines a disability, the stigma around those disabilities in each culture. But in general, 20% of any group has a disability. Those disabilities include, but are not limited to, blindness, low vision, color blindness, deaf blindness, auditory, motor, cognitive, dyslexia, reading, math, speech, seizures, physiological, psychiatric, and the list goes on and on. Most people who have a disability have more than one, which we call compound disabilities. In general, we have 5 specific categories of disabilities: recognizable, hidden, temporary, age-related, and web and digital. They seem pretty straightforward, but let's review them real fast so that we are all on the same page. Recognizable disabilities are the most familiar disabilities. These are the ones we usually see and acknowledge. A war veteran who lost an arm, a student who has a white cane because they are blind. These are disabilities that anyone can see. Hidden disabilities are a little harder, as those are disabilities that we may not be able to tell by our physical appearance. You cannot tell that someone has seizures or is dyslexic, or sometimes even if they have an auditory disability. Temporary disabilities are ones that are not forever. Let's say you fell in a hole while running and you end up finding that you have an extra bone in your leg and you end up being on crutches after surgery. Don't laugh. It has happened. Age-related disabilities are things that happen because we are getting older. These include things like auditory, visual, and motor disabilities that start to deteriorate as we get older. So with all of this knowledge, how do we even start to make an impact in our current roles on the digital side? Let's start with maps, graphs, tables, oh my. The main things all of these have in common is this. 1. If you must print a map, graph, or table, make sure if there is color on it that it is printed in color. Nothing is worse than receiving a map of an amusement park and it isn't in color and you can't tell what building or area it is. You might be thinking you're going into the cuddly kitten exhibit, but actually you're walking into the alligator pit. Always print in color. 2. If you have a map or a graph, always have a legend. There is no reason to not have a legend. The data is important, so give the user as much information as they need to be able to process the information and determine what the information is saying. 3. To help both of the above, don't only use color to distinguish important information. This also applies to text. For example, if you have this table of information, someone who does not have a vision impairment will see all of the greens, reds, and yellows to distinguish the different levels of the coding courses. But a person who is colorblind might not be able to see the difference in the red and green courses. So how would they know what the difference between the two is if there's no way to tell the difference? This is why highlighting information not based solely on color is so important. To help both of the above, don't only use color to distinguish important information. This also applies to text. Use patterns, use weights of strokes. Instead of all of the lines on a graph being a solid line, change it up with a dotted line. Change the background from a solid fill to a pattern that is easily separated from the other things that are going on the map or the graph. Make things stand out so that if you have to print in black and white, the meaning and the information is still accessible and understandable by all, just by processing the data that is in front of them. Let's talk about some general web accessibility topics. Images, my favorite. There are 2 things that are important for images. Those are alternative text and long descriptions. Both have a purpose and both should be used at the correct time. Long descriptions. If you have an image that has text or needs a lot of description to get the purpose across, make sure your image has a long description associated with it. This allows your users with screen readers to fully understand what is going on. But with this, it is best practice to not have text on an image unless it is absolutely necessary. Alternative text. Alternative text should be used for all images unless the image is purely decorative. That means things like image borders. You don't need to tell your user what it is. However, I would always code on the side of caution to only have content on the page that is important for the user to help with the processing of the content. All text should always be concise and descriptive. What do you envision with this statement? 2 animals fighting on a wall. I bet you didn't picture this image, did you? Now, if I would have said an ancient cave painting in France showing 2 deer with antlers, plump bodies, and small legs, one deer appears to be fallen over or dead, you might have gotten a little closer, right? I used to teach college web development students how to write alt text. And the tip I would always give them is this. If you had to call your mom and describe to her what the image was, what would you tell her? Whatever you would tell her is what you should write. Headings. Headings have come under some heat lately with the new Web Content Accessibility Guidelines or WCAG standards, as some accessibility professionals believe that nested heading requirements have been nullified in WCAG 2.1. I personally disagree with this and believe the standards still call for a nested heading structure. But regardless, I encourage you to always use proper heading order for the sole purpose of how headings are actually handled by screen readers and will continue to be handled by them. When a screen reader pulls up a list of headings and hears the content go from an H2 to an H5, the user is naturally going to be confused and feel as though they are missing content, when in reality, it is just poor coding. All users deserve to have well-organized content, and that means proper nested heading structure. If you're using headings because of styling change, use your classes and your IDs to style it to be what you want, not in an improper nested header. Color contrast is extremely important. I think we have all seen a presentation or have been handed a flyer where the text colors are hard to read. How frustrating is that? If y'all are like me, it is extremely frustrating. WCAG has specific standards in which we are required to meet with our color contrast. By federal law, we are required to meet WCAG AA standards. But I challenge each of us to make our colors involving text to be WCAG 3A compliant in order to be inclusive of more people. Sometimes that isn't possible, but where possible, I encourage you to go above and beyond just the requirements to champion accessibility. One thing you will run into a lot is the content writers and owners want to put up files, typically PDFs. It doesn't matter what document that goes up, you must make those documents accessible for every user that might come across it. Rule of thumb, if it can be an HTML document, make it an HTML document. Otherwise, make the document a PDF and make sure it is tagged using Adobe Acrobat Pro. Video and audio. Every video and audio that you add to your digital platforms should at a minimum meet contrast requirements, flashing requirements, and transcript and caption requirements. In addition, you should consider adding an audio description to your videos, which is required for WCAG AA compliance for recorded multimedia and pre-recorded videos. Something to consider for videos that are speeches or content that is along that line is a sign language interpretation to have your digital content be as accessible to as many people as possible. Over the many years, a new thing that has come on to the web development scene, and it is something that can either make your site better or worse, and that is Accessible Rich Internet Applications, or ARIA. There are specific reasons to use ARIA, and I have seen it done really well, and I've seen it done really poorly. For anyone who isn't familiar with ARIA, its purpose is to allow communication between screen readers and your website's functionality to make your content accessible when you are not able to use standard semantic HTML markup. ARIA was never intended to be used as a replacement for proper HTML standards, but as a way to enhance accessibility when standard HTML cannot be used. ARIA should be used sparingly due to the different interpretations and support from screen readers. When ARIA is not supported or when it is used incorrectly, it actually makes the accessibility of the site worse. Best practice is always to use semantic HTML markup first, since standard HTML is supported by all screen readers. The rule of thumb here is if it can be built in semantic HTML, build it in semantic HTML. Our last topic for today is on forms. Most forms have 3 standards. The first is timing restrictions, second is spamming preventions, and 3 is labels. When we choose to make a form timed, we should offer our users 2 simple things. The first, the ability to save their form submission and come back at a later time to complete the form. And it is courteous to inform our users of what information is needed to complete the form up front so that they are prepared with the information before starting the form. And 2, a warning must be given with the ability to extend the time. If the time is not able to be extended, the time restriction must be noted at the beginning of the process, and regardless of time extension, warnings must be given to the user as the time becomes close to expiration. When we talk about spam preventions, we usually talk about Captchas or something along those lines that proves that the person is not a spam bot. The key things here are: one, not all Captchas are accessible. Google Captchas specifically have received a numerous amount of complaints over the years for not being accessible. Even though they have made improvements, some users still experience issues with them. 2. The language you use around Captchas can actually trigger some users of traumatic events to have anxiety attacks or worse. Some examples of this that have been noted are victims of sexual assault or violence. When asked if they are human, they actually are negatively impacted because they have been told that they are in fact not human. 3. I have seen an uptick in math-related Captchas, which seem to bypass some of the above, but you must remember from our disability list, there are disabilities that directly relate to math, so I would use those very limitedly. If you find a way to make your form fields validate based off of expected input, I would advise that over using Captcha whenever possible. The last piece of the puzzle are labels. Labels are crucial in making our forms accessible. They are actually the piece that allow people to use our forms with screen readers. In order to be compliant with WCAG, you must have labels on your form fields, no ifs, ands, or buts. Labels not only make your form more accessible, but it makes your form more usable because people are used to clicking on the form field's name and being taken to the field that correlates to it. Before we finish and I answer your questions, I just want to leave you all with some things to remember, some resources, and a challenge. Some things to remember. 1. Just because something is usable doesn't mean that it is accessible. You must test everything for accessibility. 2. If in doubt, contrast it out. Ensure no matter what you are making that it has the correct contrast. 3. Use headers in the correct order. 4. Use alt text or long description for all images. 5. Use captions, transcripts, audio descriptions, and sign language interpretation when needed, and ensure that they are implemented correctly. And 6. Accessibility isn't just nice to have, it's necessary. You are the champions of accessibility, and only you can keep it at the front of your work. Here are some great resources for accessibility from various leaders in the accessibility world. Accessibilityproject.com is a great place to receive help, feedback, and to read articles about what is happening in the accessibility community, and just a great place to start your accessibility journey. The next is Accessibility actually has its own Slack channel. This is a great place to talk with real-world certified accessibility professionals about any accessibility issue you may have. It's a great place to discuss solutions and to gain insight from real users about what works and doesn't work and why. Next, we have the high contrast extension for Chrome. This is a great way to test your high contrast mode and see what works on your site and what doesn't work, especially in the realm of images. Something we didn't discuss in this talk, but I encourage you to investigate, is how different image formats are impacted by high contrast modes. For instance, many times PNGs will not show up as well as background images in high contrast mode. So users could be missing vital information on your site if your site is being viewed in high contrast mode. Next is Decum Courses. They offer courses on accessibility ranging from any topic you would want. I have used many of these courses receiving my Cpacs certification and am using it as a resource for my WAS and CPWA certifications. Their courses are great, but they do cost money. But in my opinion, they are worth the cost. Accessibility Talks YouTube channel. This channel hosts monthly accessibility presentations about various topics and are truly insightful about the world of accessibility. Next, we have Nobility. Nobility is a great place to go in general with accessibility, but they have great checklists for making sure your documents are fully accessible, which I use and share with anyone who's trying to make their documents ready for their digital platforms. Contrast Checker is my go-to contrast checker, and it is made by WebAIM, and it is a must-have site bookmark for me to verify colors for any digital platform. It shows you not only your text and the sizes of your text, but also if that is in an image, if it's actually going to be approved or in a form. So it's just all around great. Next is the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, or IAAP. They offer 4 different certifications for anyone who is wanting to expand their knowledge. It is not an easy thing to accomplish to get a certification from them, but once you have become certified, you will have the knowledge to conquer most accessibility issues that come your way. The 4 certifications that they offer, the first is the Cpacs, and that is a Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. You will learn about all of the laws in the whole world that deal with accessibility. You'll learn about digital accessibility as well as physical world, and it just brings around a full awareness of accessibility as a professional. The second is the Web Accessibility Specialist, or the WAS certification. Next is Certified Professional in Accessibility Designation. So once you receive the first 2 certifications, you will be granted the 3rd certification, which basically says that you are able to do anything with accessibility, essentially. And the 4th is actually a brand new certification that they're offering, and it is a Certified Professional in Accessible Built Environments, where once you pass your examination, you will actually be added to a list where you can be contracted out to build accessible environments for people. In conclusion, I want to challenge each of you to accept the #NoMouse challenge to raise awareness about accessibility. Challenge your colleagues, your friends, your family members, strangers on the street to help us all increase our awareness and to be able to make our universities a more inclusive environment for our students, our faculty, our staff, and the community members with disabilities. If you would like the supplemental slideshow PowerPoint that goes along with this presentation that has more facts and text, or a transcript of this presentation, please email me at bob5h@virginia.edu, bob5h@virginia.edu, and I would be more than happy to send you those items and answer questions you may have about accessibility or getting certified yourself. Thank you.